greater the obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We meet you once again Monday night at 9:30 p.m. live from Stein Studios in Ratmalana. This evening, our topic of discussion is what is the need of the hour? Is it an election? Joining us this evening on the show is Dr. Ajanta Pereira, candidate of the United National Party, as well as Gamini Pereira, attorney at law recommended by the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna. We will be also joined by Haranya Amrusurya, senior lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka, recommended by the Janata Vimukti Peramuna. Let's start off tonight's show with Mr. Gamini Pereira, attorney at law or senior counsel, recommended by the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna. Mr. Pereira, interestingly, a few weeks ago, we saw the secretary to the ministry which is the highest echelon of the government, that is the president's secretary, making a request from the state sector to donate their salaries. Just a few days ago, we saw the secretary to the Ministry of Defense stating that the security forces does not need to donate their salaries in view of this plea that was made. What if, Mr. Pereira, the same request is made by the Secretary to the Ministry of Health, Secretary to the Ministry of Transport, mayors of respective municipal councils to their fellow workers? What happens then? So, who has the Secretary of the President made this plea to, if so? Your time starts now.
Yes. First of all, I must thank you all for inviting me to this discussion in the evening. And your point, that is, the number one, that the Secretary to the President has made a request. Yes. That request is, per se, is not an official request. That is first thing. Then the second one, now we know that it is a personal request made by the Secretary to the President. Whatever the way that he made the request, and in the country and also in the political arena, there is a very huge kind of interest on it, and there are some people criticize it, some people make different point of view. Ultimately, as you said, yes, maybe a couple of days before, the Secretary to the Defense has announced that this request is not subject to any forces or civil forces and also to the police. That is what you said.
No, this is what he said, and I'm articulating what the Secretary to the Ministry of Defense said.
Yes.
Mr. Pereira.
So, basically, people can make requests according to their wish. Now, Mr. Jayasundara also made his request to contribute some kind of...
No, the question was very simple. Mr. Pereira, I don't think you got the question.
Yes.
Now, you had the President's Secretary making this request.
Yes.
And then you had the Defense Secretary saying subsequently that the security forces are not to donate their salaries as per the request made by the Secretary to the President.
Yes.
If so, just imagine if all the
other organization also refuse to say.
Absolutely. Then who has this plea been made to?
I'm coming to the point.
Yeah.
I just try to make some forward here. Now, there might be some kind of declaration by various institutions. But at the end of the day, although there is any kind of declaration like the Secretary to the Defense made, maybe the others can do. But the people, and especially the state employees, if they think that they can do the...
So you're trying to say that despite the secretary to the Ministry of Defence has said not to donate their salaries to the government, they could go ahead and do so if they wish to do so.
I think you are not properly said that. He didn't say not to do that. He said it is not covered by the request for the security.
But
he didn't
the
ask
point
not
is
to
that-
do it.
But Mr. Pereira, the point is,
Yes.
this is a request. This is not a demand. So why did the secretary to the Minister of Defence say that the security forces need not donate their salaries? Because
Yes.
it's a request. They can either do it or they cannot do it.
Yes, now here there is an issue, that is the entire country is not normalized and not all the workers are working now. Maybe few percent, I mean very small percentage of the people are working, I mean the government servants. But forces are essential service and there is no, that is essential service and their all holidays are
What about the health sector, Mr. Pereira?
health sector as well. Health sector as well.
They also can do so. The secretary to the Ministry of Health
We hope, we
can,
hope,
can
we hope.
go on record saying that people need not donate their salaries.
Sometimes I think maybe tomorrow or day after, we don't know.
So
But
the Ministry
anyway,
of
I
Transport
think
also can do the same thing.
argument behind this, why the Secretary to the Defense makes such a pronunciation, well, some declaration, is that these forces and the personals of the forces and the police are throughout working
No,
from the day
I'm posing
one.
this question to you, Mr. Pereira, because of a reason. We saw the president himself donating his 3-month
Yes,
salary
yes.
to the secretary to the ministry to the presidential secretariat,
Yes.
Dr. PB Jayasundara,
Yes.
292,000 rupees. He gave
Yes.
a check. Now I'm trying to wonder, how can the people of Sri Lanka do so, who are earning very meager amounts as salaries?
Now, can I answer that question, putting you a question again, re-question, you know? There is-
Unfortunately, I won't answer your question because
maybe,
today
yes,
my
maybe,
opportunity
just
is
to clarify
pose
the
questions to
situation.
you.
Now, is there any amount that PB Jayasundar, Mr. PB Jayasundar requested? There is nothing. You can make 1-day payment, 1-day salary, maybe a small part of the salary, whatever. But if the people are, now the concept behind is this, that is also not official. The concept behind this, the entire country come together at this time. But there are some instances, the people of this country think, yes, we will contribute. Now, for an example, you know that 5,000 rupees is given to many, most of the people,
7.3 million,
7.4 million people in this country, right? But 1 or 2 people, you can, I saw that in your channel also, they return it to this fund. They return it to the fund. Sometimes the old people, aged people, but what they think, they are patriotic. So let the patriotic to contribute this. But there is no hard and fast rule. There is no any kind of problem to anyone who is silent. That is my point of view in this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gamini Pereira, attorney at law, recommended by the Sri Lanka Pojana Peramuna to appear on tonight's Face the Nation. The question was very simple, Mr. Pereira. The question was, the president may be having the means to pay 3 months of his salaries, but there are people in Sri Lanka who do not have such means as the president enjoys, because we saw when the president was ill, he was in Singapore for nearly 4 months in a private hospital. Those kind of means you don't see the people of Sri Lanka having. So when you make a request of that sort, how fair is it? So that was the question. You don't have to answer that. Anyway, I want to go to Dr. Ajanta Pereira, candidate of the United National Party. She was also a former presidential candidate. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Pereira. It's a pleasure to have a female representation on Face the Nation. Starting off, my question to you is very simple now. Dr. Pereira, you're representing the Colombo district this time around under the United National Party banner to contest on the 20th June polls. Now, you were not even able to gain 28,000 votes at the recently concluded presidential elections. How can you be competitive this time around at a election that would be held to elect the second supreme body, the legislature of Sri Lanka?
Well, I also want to say thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And basically answering your question, the presidential election was really where the people had to vote for one person, the president of the country, and there were 35 candidates, and then the people would select the person who is coming from one of the main parties. And the race was such that basically at the end of the race there were only about 2 candidates the people were going to vote for. Because I believe in Sri Lanka, people have a huge fear of voting for someone whom they do not know so well, or they do not want to go away from the norm. So that probably is one of the reasons why I would see the smaller number of votes that I received. But when I am contesting for the parliamentary election this time, one of the reasons why I have stood up for the parliamentary elections this time is, from the Colombo district, is because the Colombo district itself is not a developed district. It has a huge number of issues. On one side is the poverty, on one side is the chaos, on one side is the economic growth that we need in the country. And I see the parliament has existed for such a long time, but nevertheless we have not been able to do many of the plans that Colombo district has had. We've had so many plans being built for Colombo city and the Colombo district, and one of the major districts in Sri Lanka, but nevertheless we have not been able to achieve.
Dr. Pereira, I think the leader of the United National Party, who is also representing the Colombo district, will take great offense to the statement that you made, saying that in the past nothing concrete has taken place for the Colombo district, and that is the very party that you are representing today on the show.
No, I do not think he would take offense, because the reason why he has brought in people, new people to his party, is because he believes in change. He wants to have economic growth, he wants to have economic development, and there has been many attempts by the United National Party, very specially, in order to bring about changes. We all know that the Colombo district, the biggest voters are really from the United National Party.
How sure are you that the leader of the United National Party needs change? He's been clinging on to power since 1994 as the leader of the United National Party. How sure are you that he wants change?
I'm sure, because that's what he wants to do, because that's why he is putting on a team who is able to bring about the change and the economic growth that's going in the right direction. And I think this is, he's openly allowing new people to come in, because he does want to bring in new ideas, new thoughts, new plans. And I think anyone who says that there are issues and somebody who wants to develop is a very honest and a clever person. And I think our leader is a very honest and a clever person. He sees the long term and he wants to bring about those changes. And to be very frank with you, if he keeps saying that Colombo district is fine and it's glamorous and it has a superb growth and there is no poverty, there is no pollution, then we are lying about it. But the most important thing is to look at the base of it, look at what it is right now and understand there are changes that needs to be done. And especially for the United National Party, the Colombo district matters because we do get a high number of votes within inside the Colombo. So people have a trust in us. People know that we are capable, we care about them, but we do need to bring about the changes, and I believe that it's the right time.
You come out very confidently today on the show. We did not see this sort of confidence when you were a former presidential candidate. We see a lot of confidence in you to bring about change in the Colombo city as well as the Colombo district. But we've seen in the past as well that respective governments, now previously, the UNP held the majority of the seats in the Colombo district as far as the parliament was concerned, but they didn't do anything much. And why should people go and vote you in, thinking that you will bring about that change, whereas that change was not instilled when the UNP government was in power before?
Well, I think maybe one of the reasons it might be that there are different characters that you need to bring in different knowledge. Now, for example, myself being a woman, and I think I firmly believe the leader of our party is the very person who actually wanted more women to be in the parliament and also in the provincial and the local authority level. 33.3% is the number that they wanted to have women in politics. And I think what basically happens is this. Some of the issues that if you really look at in Colombo district right now, and I know everybody will laugh when I say this, one of the major issues is the garbage issue. Look at the garbage issue still lingering in the Colombo district. And then the economic growth that, that can happen. And then we have a lot of shanty dwellers. We have a huge number of shanty dwellers inside the Colombo district who needs to be given better housing and so on. And I think there has been a struggle because of various issues that has been there. And I think now the time has come for us to be looking at the bigger picture, because there are two segments in the Colombo district.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajanta Pereira, candidate of the United National Party. We now move our attention to Harini Amarasuriya, senior lecturer of the Open University of Sri Lanka. Nice to have you back on the show, Harini. Starting off, what is the need of the hour right now? Is it an election? The time starts now.
No, I don't think the election is on anyone's list, any sort of normal person's list of priorities right now, because I think we're still in the midst of coping with the corona pandemic, and this is not something that is just something that we in Sri Lanka are experiencing. We are experiencing this globally, and it's a pandemic and a crisis of a nature that we have not experienced, at least not in our lifetime. So it's something that is very new, very profoundly disruptive of all kinds of systems. So I think priority has to be given to dealing with the coronavirus, and also the sort of the consequences of actions that have been taken to combat the virus. Because
so who wants an election right now?
Well, clearly it seems to be the president, because he's the one who's dissolved parliament. So we can assume that the president wants an election.
Now, I am posing this question to you, Harini, because of a reason. Time and time again on this very show, when we ask this question from the SLPP candidates who are represented on the show, they always say that this is not something we want. This is something that the Elections Commission wants to hold, to establish rule of law as well as democracy in the country. And that is why the election is being called for the 20th of June. However, we see respective members of the SLPP saying that how the Elections Commission should even conduct the elections by going to the extent of saying that you can even sanitize a ballot paper. If there was dengue, why not have the elections now? If the people can queue up at Satosa, why can't they queue up at the polling booths? So we hear this over and over again. So who really wants this election?
Well, we are having an election, or an election has been called because the president dissolved parliament. He dissolved parliament 6 months ahead of time, 6 months or so ahead of time. So we can only assume that he did so because he wanted an election, that the party that he represents wanted an election. Otherwise, this parliament could go on till the end, almost till the end of the year.
No, sir, September 6th, 2nd of September.
Yes, right? However, I mean, that is not to say that we have a perfect parliament, right? That everyone is thrilled with the parliament we have and we want this parliament to go on forever. That's not what I'm saying at all, right? However, we could have gone on with this parliament for a few months longer, given the situation the country was facing also, because the election was declared, nominations were called after the coronavirus had hit us or had come into the country. So there's nothing to say that we were unaware that this crisis was going to unfold. So, I mean, I don't understand how the SLPP can say that they do not want an election when it's their president who called for an election. So I'm assuming he knew what he was doing, or he thought he knew what he was doing when he called for an election. And that's why we are even having to decide. It's certainly not the responsibility of the Elections Commissioner to decide when to dissolve Parliament. That's not his role. That's something that the President decides. Once the President decides, then the Election Commissioner has to get into action.
The President thinks that he knew what he was doing at that time. Does that
we hope.
Does that incline for you to say that the President does not know what he's doing right now?
Well, I have serious doubts as to whether, and I think lots of people have doubts, whether we can go in for an election under these conditions right now. Right?
Thank you very much, Harini. We open the floor for questions from our journalist. On to my immediate left is Nadim Majid, and on to my far left is John Fernando. Let's start off tonight's show with John.
Thank you, Shamir. My first question is directed to you, Mr. Gamini Pereira. So we started off the show with the topic clearly laid out. The time is the elections that we severely need at the moment. So if we take elections in a whole, we know at the moment the only reason why elections will be postponed is due to the health risk where it will be imposed on the people. But we saw in history nearest in 2018, elections was postponed in Congo because of the Ebola virus breakthrough. And then in 2001 in UK as well, the election was held off. Despite the health risk which it will impose on the people or the citizens of the country, elections is exactly the opposite of social distancing, if I put it in that way. Elections is where the candidates or the supporters campaign and express their ideas to the people. It's where people create an argument between each other in order to decide where the community should head after the election, or who they should vote in for. So we clearly know now, with social distancing and with no way of mass gatherings, these healthy measures of election where campaigning or door-to-door campaigning, all of that cannot be held. So against such a backdrop, how can elections be fair and just if it was held?
Yes. I have to come with three elements.
Right.
One is objective and other two are subjective. The objective one is people in a country need a parliament, a legislature.
Right.
Without a legislature, you cannot run a country. That is one of the three pillars: legislature, executive, and the judiciary. Now, at this moment in our country, we have only the executive and the judiciary.
Right.
But the main institution is the parliament, that is the legislature. So, that is objective element of a democratic country, having a parliament. The people in this country need their franchise, have to choose any members using their franchise. That is the democracy. Finally, the parliament makes decisions, parliament makes the legislature, and also parliament look into the finance of the country, monitoring the finance. So for this, we must have a proper parliament. Now, when we take about the election manifesto of Mr. Rajapaksa, the present president, he has specifically said that he needs a parliament which he can run for 5 years period. And therefore, according to his manifesto, so he declared that after he qualified to dissolve the parliament, that is after 4.5 years according to the constitution, he did it. That is on the 2nd of March. 2nd of March, although Ms. Harini said that it is after the coronavirus introduced to Sri Lanka, that's not exactly the situation, because at that point, none of the Sri Lankan persons were identified as a person who affected the virus.
Oh, that's not
That's
true.
not
That is on the 2nd March.
No, that's
Right?
not
That is on the 2nd March.
Yeah.
So 11th March or 12th March, the first Sri Lankan person identified as a corona. Before that, on 27th January, there is one Chinese lady. That's true. But anyway, at that point, no sooner that he got the qualification to dissolve this parliament.
You're not right there, Mr. Pereira. I need some time to correct you there, because on the 11th of March this year, the World Health Organization declared coronavirus as a pandemic. The nominations closed
11th of March.
11th of March.
11th of March.
So the nominations closed on the 19th of March. So the president had ample time to revoke the decision that he took at that time and say we can go in for a further date in terms of the nominations and so on and so forth. So there was time for the president to make a decision at that time, and that is what Harini mentioned before as well. So there was time for the president to make that statement, because on the 17th of March, the president, addressing SAARC leaders, articulated that no matter what happens, he will hold an election. And on a few days later, addressing the nation, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that give a two-thirds majority to his brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, to govern the country as well. So these kinds of statements are not made when there's a global pandemic at hand. So that is what I think Harini wanted to articulate before.
You raised a very important fact. That is, the election proclamation done on the 2nd March. When you make a proclamation, being the president of the country, there are 3 things that you have to announce. One is the period for nomination, then a date for the election, and the other one is convene the parliament.
So you're trying to say that the president was unaware of the global pandemic when leader of the opposition at that time, Sajid Premadasa, clearly told parliament that there was a pandemic that we need to fight in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think you allow me to address the point. That is also I will address accordingly. Now, so whatever it is, according to his manifesto, and to go a better Sri Lanka, he declared, proclamation made on the 2nd, right? With that 3 elements which I have said. So he cannot just, revert it because of the matter where we found few virus infected people. So the legislature is very clear. At any point, you can postpone the election. You can postpone the election. Maybe the president has optimistic view that we could have the election positively, but later on he understood that is why he was waiting until the commission to decide under section
So why not, if
24.3.
that's the case, why not reconvene Parliament now?
That is in a two different
No, it is
point
not.
of view.
It's not, Mr. Perez.
One is,
It's for the
yeah.
betterment of the people.
Yeah, one is
Yeah.
that the president has taken a decision that he doesn't want to reconvene this parliament because that is not in accordance with the manifesto that he has already declared. And also,
Which manifesto is this?
that is his manifesto.
Saying that the Parliament should not that the Parliament should be dissolved?
No, not to dissolve. But what he said was, he need a parliament to go ahead with this country. Which one is helpful? Which one is healthy to his manifesto?
So Mr. Perez, I have this interesting question. So you're talking about the President's manifesto.
Yes.
Have you read President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's manifesto?
Yes.
Who reigns supreme in this manifesto, the people or the politicians?
That is, I mean, people or the?
Politicians. Who reigns supreme? So whose benefit?
It is obvious. It is obvious. People.
It's the people. So at
People.
a time like
69.
At a time there's a global pandemic. Why did the cabinet go and pass 32.1 billion Sri Lankan rupees to build a highway? Why did just yesterday they decided to open Sri Lanka's biggest cricket stadium in the country? This was even criticized by Maila Jayawardena, who was a former prominent test cricketer of Sri Lanka and also a captain. So why?
Now you're asking me one question to another,
Yeah.
but I don't think that you are giving me the chance to address the earlier issue. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, just answering to your question,
Yeah.
this is a country where you cannot stand still. This country has to go forward, according to these ladies, what they said. This is a country, a developing country, and president has only 5 years, and president has to implement whatever his plan in according to that. So I don't think there is any wrong to accommodate whatever the development plans.
Mr. Pereira, you're quite right. I mean, it's basically Keynesian economics where you have governments during times of crisis. They drive capital injections to promote economic activity and growth. But I mean, Sri Lanka is a country that hosts at most about 20, maybe 25 one-day international matches day-night a year. We already have stadiums that are making losses. These are all loss-making enterprises, the Premadasa Stadium, the Suryawava Stadium, the Pallekele Stadium, and also Dambulla. Then in addition to that, you have the test cricket grounds at SSC, Gaul, and the Pisara Oval. I mean, if you have $30 to $40 million to spare, isn't it a better idea to spend that money on projects where you will have a return on investment rather than a cricket stadium?
This is only one aspect of the development. That is, we call infrastructure development.
Yeah.
But on the other side,
I mean, let's say you could make an argument for roads, for
that
railways.
is what I say. That is what I say.
But a cricket stadium?
Now, simultaneously, the president has called upon for economic development. There is a task force leader established to develop this country economically and, I mean, getting the foreign revenues to this country on economic basis.
But
that
Mr.
is
Pereira,
also
how can you
simultaneous.
get revenue from something that you know is going to be a loss-making industry? I mean, you don't even know right now because of the COVID pandemic, globally sports have taken a hit. You don't even know what the ICC's Future Tours program is going to look like. You don't know how many matches you're going to be able to host in the next year, let alone the next 6 months or the next 2 years. You don't know how many matches you'll be able to host, how many tours will take place, whether there's going to be an increase in the number of matches. I mean, don't you believe that that money, whether it's, I mean, there's no clarity yet on how they're going to finance it, whether it's a loan or whether it's from SLC, from Sri Lanka Cricket's reserves, or we don't really know where the money is coming from. We just know that the project itself has been approved. But don't you feel that if you have access to that kind of money, at a time like this, you can be spending it on better things. Things where, if not like capital intensive projects that provide return on investment, at least healthcare and education. I mean, there's so many different things.
Healthcare and education are welfare.
Yeah.
That is welfare.
But
so you
it's
don't
still,
mix up with this. So
I mean,
what
you're still adding
you started,
to human
you started
development.
with economical matter.
Human development is
economical matters.
is
Economical
integral to
development
economic development.
at this moment cannot be implemented. Only you can plan out. You see? But the constructions, all other things can be done. So come to the point, now these welfare matters, that of course they are doing it. They're doing it very clearly.
Mr. Pereira, this is a simple yes or no question. Would you have preferred, we know that there is an energy crisis in the country at the moment. Would you have preferred if that money had been spent on a power plant instead of a stadium?
So you can name one thing, but why don't you send something else? You may say,
water
something,
sanitization,
but this is a
power
country.
plant,
This is
waste management.
I understand. This is a country. You can't just pick and choose from our individuals.
Let's take it from the president's
there
manifesto.
There should be some strategy.
Exactly. That strategy is the president's manifesto. If you had that kind of money, why not divert it to some of the projects that have been mentioned, the sustainability drives that have been mentioned in the president's manifesto? This cricket stadium is not in the president's manifesto.
You say use it for electricity, but he will say use it for water. You cannot run the country like that.
That's all fine.
No.
Electricity, water, healthcare, education is different. Cricket stadium is something entirely different.
Yeah, cricket stadium is, that's also need of at the hour, because I don't know, actually I don't know, very frankly, I don't know how the funds come, whether it is come from the funds already here. That is, of course, I don't know. But anyway, if there is anything that can be done at this moment, having this pandemic situation, I think that is not a...
So I want to
Dr.
for a second.
Ajanta,
I want to go Dr. Ajanta Pereira. Doctor, do you believe that the need of the hour is a cricket stadium?
No, of course not. I also don't know why it's been allocated. I mean, why there is a talk about a cricket stadium right now. Because I think right now the need of the hour is as I said earlier, it's the economic growth. Because the people have been, they have really lost their ways of earning an income. And there are many people who could not sell what they produce. So we have a crisis right now in the country. Even if we get rid of the coronavirus, people are hungry. And I think right now, because people who are in need are given 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, they are keeping quiet. But there is a real economic need in the country.
That
now,
is
this
unpresidential situation.
But I think what you are trying to say is this money may have come for infrastructure, so you want to use it for infrastructure. But nevertheless, right now, the need of the hour is something else. Because I think when you really talk about a stadium right now to the people wonder whether the leaders of this country are thinking about the people or something else. Because right now, what people are waiting for is someone to come and say, okay, let's help your industry, let's help your self-employment, let's help you to get better income, let's see how we can sort it out so that so many people don't lose jobs. And that's what people are thinking about right now. So I think I think in a way, I would rather say that the minister who spoke about this stadium, I think it's a totally a silly affair right now.
Dr.
Because
Pereira,
I think people are laughing about it.
On that note, I'd like to pose this question to you as well. I mean, in the run-up to the presidential election, you were amongst those candidates who argued that there was a need for an alternative political movement in Sri Lanka. If I'm not mistaken, at the first ever presidential debate held at the Sugadasa Stadium in the run-up to the election, with a majority of the presidential candidates in attendance, you spoke about the need to change the system that we're in. And at least 27,000 people believed in your message and voted for you. Well, not just the 27,000 people that voted for you, also the people who voted for Mahesh Senanayake, the people who voted for Anurakumar Dissanayake and the whole NPP movement. But now you're contesting the general election on the ticket of a mainstream party. Is this, how do you think the people who voted for you will perceive your joining a mainstream party?
I think when you really look at the politics, why do you enter politics? You enter politics because you want to bring about a positive change. And that's why I entered politics for the presidential election as well. Now, when I entered the politics at that level as a presidential candidate, one of the things that I understood from the people in this country don't think before they vote. This is not a norm in Sri Lanka. People don't think, they just go with the stream. You know, where people are running to vote, they also run with them and then they vote. So now I have joined one of out of the two big parties, I have joined the better one. Because the reason being, even during the presidential election, one of the key things that I was talking about, for the development of Sri Lanka, ethnic harmony is so important. And the United National Party is the only party that is built on the pillars of ethnic harmony.
But
Doesn't
Dr.
really
Pereira,
matter
the
where you
United
come
National
from, we
Party,
are united.
The United National Party is the party that was in government when we saw some of the worst ethnic violence in the history of this country. I'm referring, of course, to Black July. That was a UNP government that was in place at the time. So isn't it misleading to say that the United National Party is founded on pillars of ethnic harmony?
If you really look at the history of the party, who actually founded the party were the different ethnic groups that came together and said we do something good for the
No,
country.
I think Nadeem is
But
referring
during the
JP
last few
election.
times when there were ethnic issues, it's not the United National Party
No,
that caused the
1983
ethnic differences.
I
It's,
think-
it's happened in the country.
Dr.
On that note,
I
I'd actually like to have
Nadeem is
Dr.
referring
Hardy.
to the JP insurrection in 87, 88, 89.
1983.
Then the Black July,
Black July.
in 1983. So all these are
Was
not
under a UNP
going in
government.
favor of the UNP, isn't it?
Well, what I would say is still I would say that the United Nationalist Party up to today stand by the very fact they regard the ethnic groups, doesn't matter where they come from, but we unite the ethnic groups together. And this has been the foundation for the United National Party in the history, and it will remain the foundation for the rest of the time. And that's why I chose the United National Party, because without ethnic harmony, you cannot develop this country. No matter what you try to do, we need as foundation the ethnic harmony.
Can you
because
say
we
the
need
same
to
thing
build
about corruption,
together.
Dr. Pereira? Can you say the same thing about corruption?
Well, all the political parties are corrupt. I mean, we are talking, we are bringing out examples. I think this is why people are saying they want a change in the parliament, because they have seen good people have come into the parliament, but by the time they have been working with inside the parliament, they have changed their ways. So basically what people were crying out for a long time was they believe that when there are different people coming, there will be a change. None of us know what will happen, but it's the quality of the people who come in and the honesty. And that's what really matters for this. This country needs honest people, transparent people, people who care about the country and the people, just like what the Constitution says.
Dr. Ajanta, on that note, just many a time, there are many politicians who have come in, they've been on the independent or sort of alternative stream, and then they've joined one of the bigger parties, one of the two major parties or two major factions, because, as you correctly say, if you want to represent or if you want to have a realistic chance of representing your community or your electorate, then that is the way to go. Or the third force party being the JVP, those are the ways that you have to go to make that cut-off mark to get into parliament. But many a time, when these candidates are confronted with issues where they have to either stick by their principles or toe the party line, they have opted more often than not to toe the party line.
Well,
would you be able to guarantee to your voters, given that you were quite a fiery independent candidate for the presidential election, and now that you're on the UNP ticket, can you guarantee that if you are faced with a similar situation, let's say, something like a bond scam, and the party
Not
says,
one, but a couple of bond scams.
yeah, and the party says you have to act a certain way, that you have to do certain things, that you have to say these things. Will you toe the party line, or will you stand by your principles?
I think I just want to go back to the time after the presidential election and making the change. I have had discussions with the party. We still continue to discuss about various issues. The leader or the party has never asked me to become what they to their side. They have accepted me to the party, believing I can bring about a change. And I think this is where I see a positive change inside the United National Party. If you really look at the people who are contesting in the parliamentary election this time, a lot of the people are new people, new faces. Educators from different areas. So I believe they do want to bring about a change, and I'm very happy about that. And I'm 100% sure right now, and as well as in the future, that none of us will be asked to become like them, but they will accept
but Dr.
whatever
Pereira,
the resources we bring in.
But Dr. Pereira, would you admit that the UNP has no other option but to give the Colombo district candidacy to new members, because the Jatika Samagi Balavegia took majority of the existing strong men of the UNP to their camp, and that is why individuals like you have got the opportunity?
No, I don't think so, because the invitation for me to join the United National Party came long before the separation. So I do not believe that, because actually the reason being is that's why I was very positive when I was talking about the Colombo development, because they understood there are certain weaknesses, there are certain needs within inside the party in order to make the governance better, and therefore they invited the relevant people, and I'm very positive about that.
Dr. Harini, because we sort of covered this of the JVP, the issue of the JVP insurrections as well, and of the need for alternative thinking in politics in Sri Lanka. I mean, the endeavors of the various alternative groups in the run-up to the presidential election didn't really yield a result, because there was a overwhelming victory for the SLPP candidate, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. What is the future of the alternative movement, like the National People's Power, for example, and then the National People's Party, which was driven by very prominent civil society figures with General Mahesh Senanayake as the masthead. Then you had other actors who also who had committed to run for the presidential election but were unable to get their nominations in time. Then you had movements like that of Mr. Rohan Pallewata. I mean, the alternative political stream seems to be very disjointed right now, and appears to not have much public support.
I don't think the public support can be measured purely by the presidential election. Right? I think in the presidential election, however much we wanted it to be more than a two-way race, it ultimately boiled down to a two-party race. And I think the results of the presidential election was much more of a reflection of people's disappointment with the Yahapalana government than anything else. I think that's where the overwhelming sort of victory for President Gotabaya came from. People were really, really tired of the Yahapalana regime. And the alternative movements, including Dr. Pereira's movement, didn't get the votes perhaps. But if you look at the interest that it generated, I think that interest is still there. And I think that, of course, it's a much harder, much more challenging path that the alternative parties are, or the alternative movements have taken on, because, as you know, traditionally in our country, it's been a two-party system, and the way in which our electoral system is organized, the way in which the media operates, all of these factors work against alternative parties, alternative movements, right? It's only very few media that would even give alternative media a voice, you know, in the mainstream media, and hardly anything gets covered, right, apart from in these talk shows, right, or very few channels. So it's a much harder, much more challenging path for the alternative party. But I am of the conviction that we have to continue on that path, hard as it is, because I mean, by now it is evident that the main two parties have failed in whatever they have tried to do, and that despite all this talk about a new parliament and a new mandate, when you look at the people who are on the nomination list, apart from a few distinguished exceptions, it's the same old faces in the two parties. So you're not going to get a new parliament if you're going to go with these two parties.
Does the same apply for the JVP sort of spearheaded compass? That it is the same old faces?
The National People's Party, I mean, currently it only has 6 people in parliament, the JVP 6 who are included in the list. I mean, those 6 people have performed pretty well in the former parliament.
But you also
No, I'm not talking about my own opinion. I'm talking about the ranking system in the parliament, in which those 6 have always figured among the top 10, right? So that's not my assessment. My assessment is, obviously, I think they have done better, but
you're dealing with. I mean, the JVP is an establishment. I mean, despite being portrayed as an anti-establishment party, there are, even within the JVP itself, it is, for the past several years, you have seen the same faces circulate. I'm not saying that their records have been negative or that this thing. I'm just saying that it appears that across the political spectrum, and this does not exclude the JVP, it includes the JVP as well, that opportunities for new thinking and new faces are very lax. And maybe the JVP's, some would say, restrictive ideology contributes to that.
Well, that's probably why the NPP created a much broader platform, right? The NPP.
But even with the broader platform, if you look at the number of votes polled, I mean, ideally you shouldn't compare presidential and parliamentary elections, but if you look at the number of votes polled across the 2015 general election, then the next major election was the local government elections, and then the presidential election. Across these 3 elections, it does show a decline, a deterioration in the vote. So is the JVP still able to muster the kind of public support it has, now that it has taken on has this broader platform inadvertently maybe damaged the JVP's own political ideology and its support base?
I don't think so. I don't think the presidential election results is a reflection of, a good enough reflection of the public support for the JVP. I think the NPP was a good move, because I think it enabled the JVP to broaden its base in a way that it couldn't have done if it had remained as it was. I think it needed to break through certain perceptions, public perceptions also, about how the JVP functions, who can work with the JVP, what kind of alliances it can build. And I think the NPP managed to do that to some extent. Of course, it is not reflected in the voter base. But don't forget that the NPP only came into being last year, in 2019. Right? It's a very new movement. It's also a movement full of very diverse people, which is its strength and also its challenge, right? Because the NPP is broadly sort of left-oriented, progressive, but not everybody agrees on every issue, right? So there's a lot more debate, diversity and discussion within NPP, and I think as a movement it is only just beginning to form itself, even as within itself. And I think the other problem is that also for the NPP, when it launched, it never anticipated having to go, when we started discussing the formulation of something like the NPP, the intention was never to go in for an election straight away, but circumstances were such that we had to face an election, a presidential election, and almost immediately afterwards a general election.
Is the NPP prepared to face a general election on the 20th of June?
The NPP was ready to face an election if the conditions were suitable, right? But I think under these conditions, we cannot have a fair and free election, right? As you very correctly pointed out, an election is more than just people turning up on the day and casting a vote. There's a whole build up to an election. And that has to be possible. People have to be able to go out, people have to gather, the message has to go out. Right now you can't do that. So in that kind of situation, certainly it will be very difficult, especially for a party like the NPP.
But right now, I mean, in order to uphold democracy, we need to ensure that the country is run by elected representatives.
Yes.
Right now, the only elected representative, aside from the members of the cabinet who carry over as a caretaker government, the only real elected representative, and the local government authorities, mind you, at the national level, the only elected representative is the president.
Yes.
And we have this lack of oversight because parliament is dysfunctional, especially on public finances. So in this current context, isn't it an emergency, isn't it an urgent requirement that we establish a parliament and that we convene a parliament of elected representatives so that those functions of legislation and oversight can be carried out?
No,
because if we continue to postpone elections indefinitely, it simply means that rule by executive order.
Yeah, which is very dangerous. And I'm really happy to hear Mr. Gamini Pereira say that we absolutely need a parliament, right? I completely agree that you need a parliament, but there's a difference of opinion here, right? That and it's currently being heard before the Supreme Court that the president can convene parliament if he wants. If he's so concerned about oversight. Sorry.
Voicing a different opinion, you spoke about opinions here. Now, if we take now, Dr. Ajanta, you itself mentioned that major political parties or politics in general is corrupted. We have politicians coming up on shows, on stages, admitting that politicians or politics is a corrupted game. We have seen major political parties with a long trail of corruption, like several bond scams, and you can name more. So, and then there's another opinion from the people, within the people, by seeing the situation that the country is going through right now, by seeing the discipline which was imposed by the military. There's one opinion voicing that we don't need parliamentarians, we don't need a parliament, we don't need a government. Let's go for a military rule. I'm pretty sure, Mr. Pereira, you seem like you have something to add for that statement as well.
Sure.
All three of you, in one way or another, represent or was representing here, you represent political parties. But then, like I mentioned before, within the citizens of the country, there's a little opinion or voice going on that we don't need a government, let's let the military rule the country. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's the frustration of the people. That's the disappointment of the people because of the last regime. That is why the people say all the 225 people must go home and let the president to govern this. So in that sense, they have the belief, they have the trust in the president. So there are two things. One is the frustration for the last government or the parliament members, whoever, and then number two, the trust with the achieve the president.
Mr.
So
Pereira,
in between, I say, I'm 100% agree with you. You cannot have a country just with the executive or under a rule of a military. That, of course, that is not the democracy. For the democracy, as I earlier said, and also Harini agreed with me, so for the democracy, for the betterment, the supremacy of parliament, not the executive, not the judiciary is supreme in this country. The supreme is the people's sovereignty, supreme is the legislature, the parliament. So parliament, some or other, we must have a parliament. But I'm not rushing to the parliament election because of the pandemic. That's, of course, that's up to the health sector and the government, I mean the executive, to decide a proper situation, free and fair election. That is, of course.
No, but again, you say, Mr. Pereira, now you said that the decision to hold the election lies with the Elections Commission.
Yes.
Now you say in your statement that the health authorities and the executive have a responsibility.
You know, Constitution 33, in the Constitution, 33 Constitution, it's very clearly says the presidents on the advice of the commission can pave a way to have the
So then
election.
why did Dr. P.B. Jayasundar wrote a letter to the Elections Commission stating that they should do their job and not point the finger at the president?
Of course, that is perfectly correct. Why I say that is correct? The commission
So you're
is
contradicting your statement.
No. I'm explaining
There's no
you.
problem with
I'm
what
explaining.
you're saying, Mr. Pereira,
I'm
but you're
explaining you.
contradicting your statements every few seconds. So I'm trying to figure out.
No. Just give me a second. I will explain you.
Yeah.
Number one.
I can't give you a long time to explain.
No. Don't worry. I will quickly say that.
Yeah.
Once the proclamation made, that is the duty of the commission to hold the election and report back to the president, right? So once you made the proclamation, that is why the commission has to declare and made the gazette, right? But the situation, the current situation was not healthy. That is why whatever it is, the commission wrote to the secretary. But I say that is wrong. That is wrong. The commission can decide under section 24(3) of the Election Act what he has to do, what the commission has to do. You don't want to write a letter. That is why Mr. P.B.
Pereira, but you just said that holding of an election should be decided upon based on COVID-19 by the health authorities and the executive of the country.
In concurrence with the commission.
No, you did not say that.
I say
No,
that.
you did not say that.
No,
But Mr. Pereira,
maybe not,
concurrence-
but finally the commission has to do the proceedings.
But you said in concurrence with the commission. That is exactly what the commission is trying to do. They want to get concurrence with the executive and the health authorities,
So
and
actually
that's
it has
why the
to be
commission wrote
the
to the
commission with the concurrence of the health authorities and if necessary the president.
That's why they wrote.
That is the real.
But that's why they wrote to the president to get that concurrence. And instead of getting that concurrence, they got a message from the secretary to the president saying, "Well, we don't really know. You do your job." I mean, it's like I'll give you an example.
What it is in the letter.
I'll give you an example.
Get the opinion from the Supreme Court. That of course not necessary. That is what they said. Get the opinion from the Supreme Court. When it is black and white, it's very clear in the point. You don't want to go to the Supreme Court. That is why that suggestion was rejected.
Mr. Pereira, are you saying that the Election Commission is not impartial and is not independent?
Election Commission is per se is impartial.
Okay.
But they have written to the secretary is wrong. That is not necessary at all. They have the power. They have all powers to make a date or make a decision.
But Mr. Pereira, in a democracy, is it wrong for participatory decision making to happen? I mean, the commission, this is an unprecedented crisis. The commission is wondering what to do in order to stay within the letter of the law, and they're seeking the input of the president but the president is not willing. I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's say Shamir is the moderator of
Yeah.
this show, and I'm here asking questions. I ask you an inflammatory, unwarranted question, and then I say, okay, this didn't really work out the way that I thought it's going to do. Shamir, you deal with it. I'm not gonna. I mean, it's like I created the mess, and then I'm saying, okay, it's my mess, but you're the one who's going to have to clear it up.
This is not a matter of mess. This is a constitutional right. Constitutional right made by the presidents on behalf of the country, on behalf of the people of this country, voters. So after the proclamation, that is the decision, that's an executive decision.
Yeah.
Then the rest is a
So
matter
the president
of
made the
procedure.
decision, and he said, convene the new parliament on this date, dissolve parliament this date, convene new parliament 3 months later on this date. So that is the president's decision. So that means the president believes that an election can be held within this time frame. But the Elections Commission and the president also, well, whether he's admitted to it or not, indirectly concurs with the fact that during that time frame, that initial time frame, an election could not be held because of the pandemic.
In a little later.
Lockdown, right? And then the commission had made that decision as well. So there was a implied concurrence on the fact that an election could not be held. Now the commission has postponed it to the 20th of June, which has created a problem of constitutional interpretation, which the Supreme Court will hopefully resolve for us as their lordships see fit in the coming days or within the next couple of weeks. But the reality is here, there is a disconnect between the executive and the independent commission, which on a normal day is probably a good thing. But in this kind of crisis situation, when there is a need for participatory decision making, it seems that the executive has left the Elections Commission in the lurch. Just like, let's say I ask this question, I create a mess, and then I say, Shamir, okay, I've created the mess, but Shamir is going to resolve it.
So I will give an opportunity to Mr. Pereira to respond, and then I want to go to Dr. Pereira as well as Harini. Yes.
Sure. Now, what I said, the commission is doing something, a procedural matter. That is a national commission. National Election Commission is an independent organization. That is an independent institution. Then there is no any interference from the government or the president. But the president can, and the commission can advise the president to have this election under Section 33, under Constitution 33.
That can work either way. So the president can also
not either way.
Elections Commission.
It's very clear.
Yeah.
Article 33, it says, if necessary, on the advice of the commission, that the president can pave a way to have the election. So it has to be done. So if we will take this kind of situation, if the president intervene with the commission, what will be your question today?
So Dr. Pereira, just leaving that aside for the moment, do you see that there is a political witch hunt now against members of the UNP? We saw Dr. Rajasenaratne being remanded now. We saw Mangal Samaravira being questioned by the Criminal Investigations Department. It seems we are sliding back to the 2010 post-presidential election where we saw individuals in the caliber of Sarath Fonseca being put behind bars and being persecuted.
Well, see, what's really happening is the longer we keep the election waiting, there will be many things happening, because right now the whole atmosphere is
So
about
you're saying that we should go for an election.
I believe that we need an election because we need democracy. Democracy is the foundation of this country.
That doesn't reflect right based on your party's position, Dr. Pereira. You're not representing here today as an independent candidate, but you're representing here today on the show as a UNP candidate. The UNP is of the opinion that the election should be postponed and the parliament should be reconvened.
Well,
And you are
I'm not saying that we should have the election today. What I'm saying is we need to have election.
Yeah.
We need to have democracy, because we were talking about 225 people, right? People were wanting to get rid of the 225 people. So how do we give the option to the people, if they want to select someone else, is to have an election. We need to make sure, you see, not everybody who come into the party will perform exactly the way that people have voted them in. So there will be a difference, there will be disappointments, and in order for the people to be able to elect someone else, we need to have elections. Elections are a must, but when do we have it is a different affair, because right now the whole country is geared towards making sure that the country will regain its status again, because many of the people right now, they're not sure whether the coronavirus has come to an end, whether the schools will begin again, when will everybody will go back to work, and what will be, how much money will they earn, when do they have to pay the bills. You know, there are a lot of people with a lot of questions. Let's look at the three-wheel driver. You know, if you ask from a three-wheel driver who's on the street, you know, do you want an election? He will say, yes, I want an election, but he doesn't know when. He doesn't know when, because the thing is, he is waiting for the right time to have the election.
Did you get the preferential numbers from the Elections Commission?
No, we have not got preferential numbers.
So today is the 19th of, today is the 18th of May, and on the 20th, the so-called elections will be held if the Supreme Court decides that it's okay to go for elections. So you need at least 5 weeks to for campaigning. So this 5 weeks is not in this parameter of 40 days at present. So how would you cope up?
Well, basically, you know, when you're a politician, you work for the people. During this crisis, there was ample opportunity for all the 225 to perform, because people were in a desperate situation where they did not have enough to eat. They did not know when they would be able to get the vegetables. They were not sure when they can get the food items. And so the 225 people who went into the parliament, through the votes of the people, had the opportunity to serve the people. This was an excellent opportunity for those who received the votes to make sure that they took care of the people. Even right now, it's the same situation, because when the country is in a crisis, that's when the political realm should perform. So right now, even even we talk about, the party is talking about, how are we going to help the people who are in need? The three-wheel drivers who need to be, you know, they have not paid their whatever the for their three-wheelers, they have not paid their what you call it, finances. And then there are a lot of women who are sitting at home and not knowing when they can start work. You know, especially if they are domestics, can they really go back to the homes where they were working and earn a little bit of money? Then you have these people, you know, who have been earning a little bit of money here and there doing odd jobs. Can they go back? These are the questions that people have.
Keeping that in mind only, the government is giving out the 5,000 rupees dole.
5,000 rupees, it's okay that they gave the 5,000 rupees. But you know, when they gave the 5,000 rupees, I do not know whether you observed that the prices of vegetables and everything else went up. And that's something that we noticed when, I mean, 5,000 rupees was a good thing that they gave to the people. But at the same time, the price of vegetables went up, everything else went up. So the 5,000 rupees went away dissolved.
No, but I don't agree with you on that statement, saying that the prices of vegetables did go up. The price of vegetables did come down, Dr.
You know, there were so many
If
discrepancies.
you go to the village, you will see that farmers are finding it difficult to sell their produce, because the middlemen or the businessmen who sell vegetables come and buy their produce for 5 rupees or 10 rupees. This is, I'm talking about a kilo of pumpkin, giving you a classic example. The prices of carrot had gone down drastically.
How much?
What we experienced the carrots,
Yeah.
cabbage.
How much? They went up so high. I myself was involved in giving vegetables and rice and so on to the people. And therefore, I was buying vegetables and rice every single day during the curfew period. And I was going around giving it to the needy people. And I myself experienced how expensive it was becoming. I'm not just saying it.
Maybe she
It
has
really
gone to the
happened.
Kalukadea.
It really happened, and I was wondering where were the consumer authority officers, because they were the ones who were supposed to be in charge of observing if there were any discrepancies. And then also we said very clearly, put some signboard to say how much it is instead of just saying it, when you buy it. There were a lot of issues there. So what I'm saying is, okay, 5,000 rupees was given, that's fine. But now we hear maybe 5,000 or another 10,000 is going to be given. But I think that's little too much, because what people need right now is not just money to buy vegetables and rice, but rather in order to develop their income, because there are a lot of people who are having self-employment.
The stand of your political party. The UNP says that they are willing to go ahead, if they were in power, to give 20,000 rupees as a dole to those affected by COVID-19 and those who do not have a job right now. However, you are of the opinion that even 10,000 rupees is too much.
No, I'm not saying that. Why we are saying 20,000 is we are thinking of how to help this person to come up economically. You see, what you need to give the money for right now, okay, the 5,000 earlier was fine for vegetables and foods and things because it was a need. But the next one, it should be connected to their economic upgrowth. Because, just giving people money for food is not sufficient right now in the country. What they need is a way of earning an income. And so 20,000 is fine. So that person who gets the 20,000 can start a self-employment.
So you've heard the views expressed by Attorney at Law, Mr. Pereira, as well as Dr. Ajanta Pereira, as well, candidate of the United National Party. How differently would the NPP handle this business? Because your name was recommended to us today by the National People's Power Party. And how would the NPP handle this situation?
Okay, first can I respond very quickly to what Mr. Pereira said in terms of...
Both Pereiras, you are welcome to counter the argument.
Yeah, because I mean, at the very least, I think there is no consensus on whether who actually has the authority to decide on the election, right? Though Mr. Pereira sort of very confidently says it's the Elections Commission, and that's why we've gone to the. That's why there are cases before the Supreme Court, because I very recently read an opinion by Professor Savitri Gunasekara, which is very different to what Mr. Pereira is saying right now. So at the very least, I think we have to acknowledge that there is no consensus on this. So the fact of the matter is that, knowing that there was a global pandemic, whether that pandemic had reached Sri Lanka or not to the extent that it has reached us today, we knew that this thing was coming not in March, we knew it not in February, we knew it in January, we knew it in December. Countries were asked to prepare for this as far back as December 2019, right? So knowing all this, in the midst of all of this, was this election declared. So I do not dispute the fact that the lifetime of this parliament is over, right? The presidential election, that reflects the fact that the people are ready for a change. But this crisis is of an unprecedented nature. It's not something we've ever experienced, and the president had ample knowledge that this was going to hit us. So therefore, he had alternatives. He didn't have to dissolve parliament in 4.5 years. He could have extended the life of the parliament. It is his own party which is in government right now. It is his brother who is the prime minister. So he was in control of the government, right? This idea that you need 2/3 in order to implement all the things.
But they didn't have a parliamentary majority. They didn't have the 113-seat simple majority.
They didn't have a simple majority, but I mean, that he's no longer talking about a simple majority. To now they're saying without a 2/3 they can't accomplish what is in the
And
manifesto.
if I'm not mistaken, a vote on account that was submitted was defeated in Parliament
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So maybe the president was concerned that, I can't speak for what the president was thinking, but maybe the president was concerned that given that he can't get any spending approved by this parliament, that it was better to dissolve this parliament.
But he had to take the pandemic into consideration when he made this decision. You cannot ignore what was going on in the rest of the world. You cannot ignore. I mean, come on, we are not talking about a simple flu here, right? I mean, we are talking about an event that will change our lives and our societies in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine, right? This idea of how we are going to recover from this, what kind of an economy we need. Dr. Pereira was talking about economic growth. I mean, now there are people who are talking about whether economic growth as a major principle in economic theory can any longer work, right? Because things have changed so drastically. So it is in the midst of such a crisis that we are sort of, I mean, the language with which we are even talking about this crisis to me is incomprehensible. We are talking about it as if it's some kind of minor thing where we are in a sort of a competition with each other to see which country is going to do the best. This is not about which country is going to do the best. This is a global crisis of a nature that we've never seen, and it's going to change our lives in ways that we cannot anticipate and we cannot imagine.
Dr. Harney, I mean, with the current political deadlock, because right now this is in essence a political deadlock, with conflict between the executive and, well, the absence of the legislature, and now
I couldn't answer the question that
Yes,
you
of course.
raised.
I'm waiting for a reply for that as well. And then we'll get back to you another in a minute. Because we have
May I? Because I...
No, you
Sure,
can
go ahead.
respond to my question and then move on to another.
Yeah, I'll pose a question in a few minutes. Once,
So I think the priority for the NPP would have been containing the virus, containing the pandemic, and then focusing on the consequences of the kind of lockdown situation that we went into. And I think the economic consequences, the loss of jobs, the loss of incomes, the hardships, the psychological, the anxieties that are being created, all of those things would have taken their attention primarily, I think. And I think we have to acknowledge that this kind of crisis is not something that any one government, any one party, any one institution can cope with. None of us knew what this was going to be like. None of us knew what would happen. So I think it called for a multi-sectoral, very consultative, very sort of inclusive decision-making process, whereby you sort of had to learn as you went along and respond as quickly as possible. I think that's what would have been the approach.
As you correctly mentioned, I mean, as far back as late December, because there were allegations of mixed messaging that were leveled at the WHO as well, especially with regards to the WHO and the situation in China, and allegations of misrepresentation of numbers by China. But as you correctly mentioned, at least as far back as late December, there was awareness that this crisis, this pandemic is basically a global epidemic, that this pandemic would be coming to Sri Lanka, and there were indications. First patient was discovered in January, so on and so forth. But for all this time that the parliament was in existence, there was no call from within the opposition to convene the National Disaster Management Council and to act on the provisions of the Disaster Management Act. Now, that is a body which has opposition representation as well, the leader of the opposition and the five opposition representatives chosen in consultation with the speaker. If the National People's Power or the UNP or the SJB, which was still forming at the time, or the TNA or any of the other opposition parties, if they really felt that this was going to be a disaster on this scale, why didn't they when Parliament was around, immediately called for the National Disaster Management Council to be convened. That council, by the way, has not met.
Not
been
met.
issued.
Not been, yes.
Even though
yeah.
it is
Nadeem,
required
you need
by
to pose
law
the
to
question
meet
because we need to
once
wrap up.
every
Yeah.
3 months.
What is your question, Nadeem?
That's the question.
yeah,
Why wasn't the call there from the opposition?
The NPP did call for that to be summoned, I think, sometime in January, right? January, February. Dr. Nihal Abhay Singh, who's a member of the NPP, did call for that. And even subsequently, quite early on.
Was there a call in Parliament? Like, is there a record on the Hansard to say that this MP called for this?
This I don't know, right? But I know that that there was a document that went to the president with certain recommendations from the NPP, in which it was said call these institutions because in a way we do have a structure in place. We have a constitutional sort of structure.
The fact that that structure has not been followed, the structure set down by the Disaster Management Act,
is a huge mistake.
Isn't that also a failing on the opposition? Doesn't it reflect a lack of awareness amongst members of parliament of the structures of the country and the institutional structures of the country and how it should function? Because, I mean, true, it was the president's decision to dissolve parliament on the 2nd of March, but right up to the 2nd of March, any of the 100 plus opposition members of parliament could have raised this issue on the floor in parliament and said, hey, I mean, it was raised, but the specific call for these institutions to be convened, to highlight that this is the process that needs to be followed, didn't come from either the opposition or the government. So given that that was the state of the parliament that was in place, can we expect, even if it is reconvened, that they will in fact follow the procedures and protocols that have been put in place by them?
But don't you think that it's better to have a not so perfect parliament than a dictatorship? If you had to choose between a dictatorship or a militarized government and a dysfunctional, slightly chaotic democracy, what would you choose?
So I pause at that. Unfortunately, we have to go for a short commercial break. But I want to give an opportunity to John Fernando to pose some questions before we go in for a short commercial break and for the final round. John.
Yeah, thank you, Shamir. Now, speaking about the elections again, if we direct our attention to over there. Now, like we started the argument in the beginning, due to the global pandemic, there's a health risk which will be imposed on the citizens. But then if we take a look at how democratic will it be, the elections in a whole, because we saw in Iran, when the elections was held, there was a significant drop of the voter turnout. And then if we say that the elections, let's say the elections was held, like on the 20th, as it is planned, there will be a significant drop in not only just a drop in the voter turnout, but there's a risk that this drop will particular demographic groups, it will affect particular demographic groups like, let's say, the elderly population. There will be a significant drop in the elderly population, and then patients who are sick, or not just the coronavirus patients, but other patients who will have a high risk of going into voting for the election. So how would we justify this? How will this affect if the elections was held, the voter turnout specifically? Professor?
I think it will, quite apart from the voter turnout, think of the risk that we are going to place the people who are going to actually have to make sure the election happens, right? There's a huge requirement of public officials who have to man every polling booth, the security. Think of the expense that we would have to also spend on such a thing. So there are going to be.
Speaking about expenses, if we take the recent South Korean elections, we can take that as a module for a fair election in a systematic manner. But then if we deeply investigate how this election was held, there was very strong social distancing measures. where
You're
every
speaking
voter,
about South Korea, John.
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
the elections, where every voter was sanitized and they were given individually, they were given gloves, and then.
So, our question is, can't that be done in Sri Lanka?
Well,
Can-
the
can
thing
we afford
is,
it?
you see, in Sri Lanka, we have a history of elections where, anyway, most of the parties and so on, and also in general, people spend a lot of money unnecessarily. Now, if you really look at the elections, you know, how do we perform our elections? We have huge rallies. We have busloads of people being brought to a particular place, and then what? 2, 3 people are speaking, and giving them lunch packets or whatever, and trying to, you know, win the election through this kind of means. So I think in that sense, there is always an extra unnecessary expenditure. But I think in this election it's going to be very different because people have already understood who really cares about them, who really may be the best people that they want to take to the parliament. Because they've had enough time to look at the people who helped them during the crisis period.
Dr. Ajanta, I'm speaking about the day of the election itself.
Yeah, I know.
The only way that election can be held is by taking extensive measures like South Korea did.
Yeah.
Can the Elections Commission or can Sri Lanka afford to take such measures like giving every single voter gloves and pens and pencils for just in general?
Well, that's
can
what
Sri Lanka
democracy
afford
is
to take?
about. Democracy is an expensive thing. You know, for people to be able to elect someone to look after them, well, you know, this is something that we need to do if it need be, because the reason being that's what democracy is about. And that's why South Korea may have done it, because it gave the opportunity for people to elect. So it is expensive. It's not going to be easy.
So you're
but at
saying
the
even
right
despite-
time, not
even
right
despite-
now,
Yeah.
when there is a situation, a crisis where nobody knows about it. But then, okay, let's have a look at another way. Can we really get rid of coronavirus? We can't. Because the coronavirus is a virus that's going to linger for years. So we can't just get rid of, we can't tell a date as to on this particular day the coronavirus will leave our island. It won't happen like that. But at the right time, utilizing expense, we need to allow the people to vote.
Right, thank you very much, gentlemen, and the two ladies for joining us. We have to go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, we speak more on the final round with the panelists' closing remarks on what is the need of the hour. Is it an election? All this and more after this short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
මගහැරුණු පාඩම් ටික TV එකෙන් ඉගෙන ගන්න. TV1 Classroom නව පන්ති ආරම්භුණා. සතියේ සෑම දිනකම සවස 6 සිට 7 දක්වා. සාමාන්‍ය පෙළ උසස් පෙළ ගොඩ යන්න. TV1 Classroom ඉගෙන ගන්න TV බලමු.
මෙච්චර කල් උඹලපට කිව්වේ නෑ. යමු.
මායිමෙන් අපි ගැනත් පොඩ්ඩක් කියන්නකෝ. එතකොටනේ රටම අපි ගැන දැනගන්නේ.
මායිම හැමදාම හැමදේම දිනපතා රාත්‍රී 7:30ට.
Welcome back. We now focus our attention in the final round first to Harini Amarasuriya, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. Harini, if you could turn back time and advise the government in power, what would that advice be?
Knowing that there was going to be a pandemic.
Yes, knowing that there was going to be a pandemic.
I would have said be patient and go with the full life of this parliament, because we cannot afford an election at this point. So grit your teeth and just get through this period, because the priority has to be on containing the effects of the pandemic and recovering from the consequences of the pandemic. Like Dr. Ajanta pointed out, I think right now here we are sitting here and talking about the pros and cons of an election, but there are thousands and thousands of people right now who have lost their jobs. There are kids who are not sure whether there's going to be a grade 5 scholarship, whether there's going to be A-levels, what's going to happen with their education. There are women who are trapped in their homes with sort of huge, I mean, the impact of this virus on women is something we didn't touch upon at all today, right? The burden on women has increased economically, psychologically. You know that domestic violence rates have shot up during these past few weeks, not just in this country, but globally. So the problems that people are facing are huge, right? And we are facing a very uncertain future where everything we know about this world, we have to rethink again. What an economy means, what education means, what our health means, what it means to what safety, security, all of these things mean. We are going to have to rethink, right? So all of our energy, and not just as political parties, but as a nation, as a community, as global citizens, all of our energy has to go into figuring out how we are going to come out of this, because this is not something that we are going to be able to just turn a switch back on and go back to what it was like, 3 months ago. It's not. The world is going to be very different, and we have to be ready for that. And there are people who are really, really suffering as a result of, not because they got the illness, but because of the consequences of containing the virus. So that's where our energy has to be. So I would have told the government, hold on a little while longer.
Bite the bullet and wait until the 2nd of September.
Because, I mean,
and then let's speak about
if you are
election.
so confident, based on how they handled this pandemic, it would have been a eased cakewalk into parliament for them.
Thank you very much,
right?
Harini Amarasuriya, Senior Lecturer of the Open University of Sri Lanka. So you're saying it's not going to be a cakewalk if the elections are held anytime soon?
No, it's going to be a disaster.
Thank you very much, Harini. We have Mr. Gamini Pereira, Senior Counsel, recommended by the Sri Lanka Pujana Peramuna. You just heard the remarks made by Harini with regard to how the government should have acted, waited until the 2nd of September and then called for election. So the elections may be or would have been held by the end of November or the first week of December. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I personally appreciate her point of view, but that has to be within the framework. What is the framework is the Constitution. In the Constitution, there is no such a move can be done within this period. Whatever said and done, the Parliament is dissolved. If she can point out me, what are the provisions that we have to reconvene this Parliament? That, of course, you cannot do it. You cannot do it. Therefore, whatever the day, as Dr. Pereira said, we must have the election at the very first instances when the situation is good for the free and fair election. So now we cannot go back. We have to go forward. This country go forward. Now, we'll take an example. If we reconvene this parliament, the earlier parliament, so how many months we can go? As one of the speakers said now, so this cannot be, this pandemic cannot be ended up within a short period. it might go another 1 year until vaccination is found. There might be some another wave of the pandemic. So we have to think, how can we get rid of this situation without having affected the pandemic to the people? So somehow or other, we have to have the election that maybe not sooner, maybe another 2 months' time, and then let the people's mandate to be restored. If the parliament, the opposition, decided to honor the mandate of the people when they have done on 16th November, they could have easily said, let the parliament be dissolved at that point. If that is the case, there won't be any issue. We have a new government, new parliament. That could have been done. But that was not done by the opposition. They didn't respect to the mandate of the people. So this is the problem. This is party politics, not the politics, not the democracy of the country. So you have to think about the people's wish. That is why I say, if they have mandated, I mean, it's a better proposal than this. So if that is the case, I don't think that there won't be any issue for the parliament. The other thing, as Nadim said, now, when it was happened, no one suggested for a disaster management forum, whatever, council.
The council.
Not only that, during the last 5 years, not a single word uttered, having 2-3 situations, Salawa and Kunukanda, that is waste place in Mitaramulla, and there is another.
So you don't think
they don't suggest it, they don't implement it. The disaster management council, saying that now they are ethically or morally they cannot challenge it, or they cannot talk about it within a very small period of time. That the
just dragging your attention before I move to Dr. Ajanta, right to the start, the questioning that I posed questions on Dr. P.B. Jayasundara's request that was made.
Yes.
We've seen Vimal Veeravansa, who is very vocal these days about how important it is to hold elections, and you can even sanitize the ballot paper up to 53 degrees.
Heating at 53 centigrade.
I don't know how it's humanly possible, but I respect the comments made by former parliamentarian Vimal Veeravansa and now cabinet minister with regard to his statements. However, he is not vocal about Dr. P.B. Jayasundara's statement, because he's the very person who told P.B. Jayasundara and addressed him as an economic assassin.
Yes. You know, the politicians are politicians.
Right, okay, that's enough. You don't have to say anything more than that, Mr. Pereira. Politicians are politicians.
How could parliament have been dissolved in November?
Why? If you
the 4.5 years was only he dissolved
with two-third majority. There are
two-thirds
majority. If you admit the mandate, you could have support the government.
Thank you very much. No, let's not go any further on that. I need to give attention to Dr. Ajanta Pereira.
Oh, one thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I need one clarification.
Yeah.
You questioned me about the cricket ground.
Yeah.
You know, the source of fund come from ICC, not from the consolidated fund.
Yeah.
So it is better to get
I'm not saying
it is better to get the money and do the needful than not.
Right. Anyway, Mr. Pereira, you are entitled for a statement. However, we've seen individuals like Roshan Mahanama, Mahira Jayawardena, who are former cricketers and want to do a service to the country in terms of cricket, highly criticizing the actions taken by the government to open a cricket stadium. That probably would have been in the books. They could have done it later, but not at a time a pandemic was going on in the country. Anyway, we are not talking about that now. So I want to move my attention to Dr. Ajanta Pereira, candidate of the United National Party. Dr. Ajanta Pereira, what are your plans for Colombo and Sri Lanka if you are elected to the post of parliamentarian, and probably even a deputy ministerial or a ministerial post or portfolio, given the fact that the UNP may go in for a coalition government with the ruling party if the SLPP and the UNP can unite. It seems like that at present, that these two parties are planning to unite after the June 20th so-called elections, isn't it?
Well, at the moment, I think the United National Party wants to be very supportive of the government in the actions that they are taking, in the sense of it's very important that the politicians work together right now to end this the disaster, and thereby so we can create a situation in the country that the people they don't have an extra headache, but they know that everyone is working towards for a betterment.
So
Okay,
we hope and pray it's not a disaster like the 2015 coalition government between the UNP and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party.
No, at the moment, what the United National Party is saying is this: we are supporting the government in order to bring an end to this crisis. Nevertheless, we are very concerned about the economic crisis that's
It's very
coming
simple,
up.
isn't it? You scratch my back and I will scratch yours as a
No,
favor.
it's not really that, because I think I also agreed 100%. You know, when the government is struggling to bring an end to this crisis, and if we keep on finding faults, it would not help. But we are very concerned about one fact, is that, you know, when we have allowed the people to now to be roaming around and they're working, we need to be testing them. We need to make sure that the PCR tests are done adequately.
There are ways in which common ground or common consensus could be made in Parliament. We saw when the 18th Amendment to the Constitution came into play, majority of the members voted in favor of the motion. And on the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, majority of the members voted against the motion. So we've seen in many occasions that parties coming into a common consensus, to a common ground. My question to you is whether or not the UNP will tie hands with, in the event the SLPP gets a majority in Parliament or even a minority in Parliament, to create a stronger government.
UNP is very capable of running this election and securing enough seats. But at the moment, right now, we are supporting the government in order to finish this and then to hold the elections. Now, with regard to what my plans
What your plans are, yes.
For Colombo district, I think one of the most important thing is the garbage issue is a real big issue in the country right now. We have in Karadiana a huge dump site. Yeah. We have in Mithunumulla, we have Blumendal, we have Mutturajavela. Up to now, the garbage crisis has not been solved. But I am the very person who wrote the national policy on solid waste, so I believe that I really want to end this crisis, make sure that the local authorities take authority and become responsible, and that we really start making compost so that we can really develop the agricultural sector. And at the same time, recycling. But at the same time, the most critical one in Sri Lanka right now, Colombo district right now, there are a lot of shanties. There are a lot of places where people are living together in huge numbers. And in these places, the health is a big issue and also the environment. So I think there should be adequate housing for the people in Colombo, and thereby so that people would not only just have housing, but they should also have recreational facilities. There should be a better environment for them. And then if you look at the Colombo city itself, you know, if you compare with other countries in the world, like Germany or England or France, you know, Colombo Peta does not look anything like that. And I think right now there are a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to develop their businesses. And I think we need to help these people to develop their businesses, but at the same time, put a better structure for Colombo city. And also we have a lot of people who are coming from outstation. They're coming and they're working in Colombo, and we saw their need during this particular time because they were all stuck. And then they were given bag full of dry rations, but they could not cook. because they don't even have the facilities to cook. So they were really lost, and I think we need to cater for that. It's very, very important that we cater for those people.
Thank you very much.
We create a situation in the Colombo district, in one terms, develop still agriculture, not fill the agricultural land and build roads, but we develop the agriculture, we develop the better industries, housing, cleanliness, and we need to make sure that every single person inside the Colombo district have a house to live in or a flat to live in, so that they can live happily.
Thank you
and
very much.
That's very, very
Dr.
important for Colombo
candidate of the
district.
United National Party as well as former presidential candidate. Thank you very much, Harini Amarasuriya, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. Her name was recommended to us today for the show by the NPP. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajanta Pereira, candidate of the UNP, as well as Mr. Gamini Pereira, as well, attorney at law. His name was recommended to us by the Sri Lanka Pulajana Peramuna. We also did invite Srila Laktilaka, attorney at law, representing the Samiki Jana Balavega. Unfortunately, in the last minute, Mr. Laktilaka pulled out of the show, saying that he has some personal commitments and unavoidable circumstances that led to his not attending the show tonight. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Nadeem. As always, at a time we are commemorating the anniversary of the war victory of Sri Lanka 11 years after the end of the conflict. We are still far from battling our biggest menace, our biggest enemy, that is corruption. I leave you tonight with the quote, as I always do: victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. Take care.